Imagine for a moment that you are participating in a highly funded, extremely rigorous archaeological excavation. You are digging through completely undisturbed layers of solid rock, strata that geologists have definitively dated back to the Jurassic period.
Right, so we are talking about an era roughly 150 million years ago.
Exactly. So you are deep in this ancient rock. You carefully brush away the dust, fully expecting to find, the fossilized remains of a dinosaur or an ancient fern.
As any paleontologist would.
Right. But instead, sitting there perfectly preserved right in the middle of that prehistoric stone, you uncover a fully modern smartphone.
Wow. Oh, well, that would certainly stop the dig in its tracks.
It really would. But the question I want you, the listener, to ask yourself right now is, how would the scientific community actually handle such a discovery? I mean, would they immediately halt the presses, rewrite the entirety of human history, and question everything we know about time and human development?
Or would they quietly toss the device into a storage closet somewhere?
Exactly. Would they declare it an anomaly, maybe whisper about some elaborate hoax, and just simply pretend it never existed?
It is a profound hypothetical, and, it strikes at the very heart of epistemology.
Epistemology meaning the study of how we know what we actually claim to know.
Precisely. We are conditioned from a very young age to believe that science operates as this perfectly objective lens. We imagine a system that automatically and, well, joyfully adjusts its theories the very moment new physical evidence is introduced.
That's right. The scientific method. You observe, you hypothesize, you test, and you adapt.
But the historical record tells a much, much different story. When empirical evidence fundamentally contradicts the foundational framework of an entire discipline, the reaction is rarely one of immediate acceptance.
Institutions tend to protect their established narratives.
They absolutely do. It is almost a reflex.
And that sounds like a premise for a science fiction novel, I know. But according to the massive stack of research we are diving into today, that exact scenario, well, metaphorically speaking, of course, is actively playing out in evolutionary science.
It is. And that brings us to the focus of today's deep dive. We are exploring a staggering, just an absolutely massive collection of sources excerpted from the book The Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael A. Cremo and Richard L. Thompson.
Our mission for this deep dive is to examine the heavily suppressed evidence. Evidence suggesting that anatomically modern humans may have existed millions of years ago.
Millions, not thousands. And to do that, we're going to look very closely at what the authors term the knowledge filter.
Now, we must clarify right at the outset for anyone listening who might be a bit skeptical that the sources we are dealing with today are not rooted in, internet conspiracy theories.
No, not at all. There is no fringe speculation here. Cremo and Thompson built this entire analysis using primary source documents.
We are talking about original field notes, peer-reviewed journals from the 19th and 20th centuries, and formal geological surveys.
The goal is simply to observe how the mainstream scientific establishment handles physical data that breaks its own established rules.
And to really grasp the gravity of this, we need to go back to the bedrock of the modern evolutionary timeline. Let us look at the year 1871.
A very pivotal year for biology.
Extremely. That is when Charles Darwin publishes The Descent of Man. Now, in his earlier work on the origin of species, Darwin was actually quite cautious about applying his theories directly to human origins.
He was. He sort of left human beings out of the immediate equation to avoid the inevitable uproar.
But by 1871, the gloves were completely off. He explicitly proposed that humans descended from a hairy-tailed quadruped.
And that single declaration essentially set the marching orders for the next century of archaeology and paleoanthropology.
It really did. Once that theoretical framework was established, the geological timeline became this rigid canvas, and the story of human evolution had to be painted exactly onto that canvas, no matter what.
To follow the evidence we are going to discuss today, you, the listener, need a basic map of this conventional timeline.
Right. Let us break down the epochs.
So we begin with the Oligocene epoch. That stretches back roughly 38 million years. This is where early ape-like creatures are placed.
Then we move into the Miocene.
Correct. The Miocene spans from 25 down to about 5 million years ago. This is followed by the Pliocene, starting around 4 million years ago.
And the Pliocene is crucial, right? Because that is when the first hominids, creatures like Australopithecus, supposedly make their very first appearance.
Exactly. That is the established starting line for hominids. Then we enter the Pleistocene, the era of Homo habilis and Homo erectus.
And finally, according to this standard textbook model, anatomically modern humans Homo sapiens only emerge at the very end of this progression.
Right. Roughly 100,000 to maybe 300,000 years ago, maximum.
That is the chart we all saw in our high school biology textbooks. But the authors of our source material highlight a massive fundamental flaw with paleoanthropology itself as a science.
It is a structural flaw in how the data is gathered.
Think about it like this. If you are a chemist and you mix two chemical compounds together in a beaker and get a surprising reaction, any other chemist in the world can replicate your experiment in their own lab to verify it.
They can control the variables perfectly.
Yes, but paleoanthropology does not work like that at all. Once a bone or a stone tool is dug out of the earth, its context is destroyed forever.
The destruction of context is really the original sin of excavation.
Explain what you mean by primary context.
The primary context is the exact position of the fossil within the sedimentary layers. It is the specific chemical makeup of the surrounding soil, the undisturbed nature of the strata directly overlying it.
All of which proves how old the object actually is.
Right. But all of that vanishes the very second the object is lifted from the dirt. From that exact moment forward, the entire scientific community is forced to rely entirely on the finder's honesty, their competence, and their written field notes.
So if a researcher uncovers something deeply anomalous, something that breaks the rules, their peers cannot travel back in time to see it situated in the ground.
No, they cannot. They can only read the report and look at the isolated objects sitting on a clean laboratory table.
Which brings us to the central mechanism driving this entire phenomenon, the knowledge filter.
The filter is really the core thesis of Cremo and Thompson's work.
I look at this filter almost like a bouncer at an exclusive high-end nightclub. The dominant evolutionary theory is the VIP list. If a piece of evidence does not have its name on that list, the bouncer turns it away at the door.
Regardless of how rigorous the dating methods are.
Exactly. No matter how pristine its geology is, it gets rejected. And we should be clear, this is not necessarily a smoke-filled room of men in suits plotting to lie to the public.
No, it is a sociological filtering process. Unwelcome evidence is simply ignored. It is denied funding, left unpublished, or dismissed entirely because it threatens the established VIPs of the academic world.
The psychological drive behind this filter is incredibly powerful. Human beings, and this includes highly educated, rigorously trained scientists, possess a deep psychological craving for order.
We all want a story that makes sense from beginning to end.
Yes, and the linear progressive narrative of human development, this image of a stooped, primitive ape gradually rising step by step to become the intelligent, upright, modern human, is incredibly comforting.
It provides a sense of destiny, a feeling of ultimate biological achievement.
But when a piece of physical evidence threatens to shatter that linear progression, it induces severe cognitive dissonance. The knowledge filter basically acts as an intellectual defense mechanism to eliminate that dissonance.
Let us look at how this filter actually operates out in the field. The sources describe this perfectly in Chapter 2, focusing on incised and broken bones.
A prime example of this is the Old Crow River site in Canada. Researchers up there found animal bones that exhibited distinct intentional modifications.
Right. These were not just cracked rocks or accidentally splintered bones.
No, these were bones shaped by human tools before the fossilization process even occurred. And they were found in an alluvial plain with a definitive geological age of 80,000 years.
Now, to fully understand the conflict here, you have to realize what the absolute dogma in North American archaeology was at the time.
The Bering Strait theory.
Exactly. The textbook rule stated as an absolute fact that human beings only crossed the land bridge into the Americas 12,000 years ago.
So finding human-modified bones dating back 80,000 years does not just bend the rule. It completely obliterates the established timeline for human migration.
It shatters it.
But wait, hold on. If you find an ancient bone with a mark on it, couldn't a skeptic just argue that it might be natural wear and tear? I mean, how do we know it was an intentional human cut mark and not just the result of a carnivore gnawing on it, or maybe a rock scraping against it in a fast-moving riverbed?
That is exactly the counter-argument the establishment uses to filter the evidence. They immediately default to natural causes.
But how does the forensic analysis actually hold up against that?
Well, forensic analysis can easily distinguish between these marks. A carnivore's tooth leaves a very specific U-shaped groove in the bone, and it is almost always accompanied by crushing damage from the jaw pressure.
Because an animal is trying to break the bone open for marrow.
Right. But a stone tool, like a sharpened flint flake, leaves a sharp, V-shaped microscopic groove, and inside that groove you will find internal striations caused by the uneven microscopic edge of the stone.
And that is what they found at Old Crow River.
Yes. The modifications at Old Crow River and many other suppressed sites exhibit the distinct, unmistakable signatures of percussive human tool use and deliberate cutting, not random animal scavenging.
And the sources take this even further back in time. If 80,000 years shatters the timeline, what happens when we go back millions of years?
The resistance becomes even more intense.
Let's look at England's Red Crag Formation. This geological stratum dates back to the Pliocene epoch. That makes it somewhere between 2 and 5 million years old.
A time when only very primitive hominids were supposed to be wandering around Africa.
Exactly. Yet, researchers pulled fossilized shark teeth from this specific English rock formation. And these teeth had perfectly circular, beveled holes drilled directly through their centers.
A beveled hole is incredibly significant from an engineering perspective.
Because it tapers, right?
Yes, a natural fracture or a puncture from a predator's bite creates a jagged, irregular break. A beveled hole, one that tapers smoothly from a wider opening to a narrower exit, is the absolute hallmark of a mechanical drilling process.
It requires a tool to be rotated with sustained, deliberate pressure.
Precisely. It is intentional manufacturing.
And how did the establishment react to this undeniable manufacturing? A prominent scientist of the era, Gabriel de Mortier, reviewed these perfectly drilled 2-million-year-old shark teeth and simply dismissed the holes as, quote, geological impressions.
Which is a completely meaningless term in this context.
It really is. If you are listening to this, ask yourself, if a bone has a clear, undeniably manufactured drill hole in it, how can a highly educated scientist just declare it a natural geological anomaly without offering a single shred of mechanical proof as to how nature could naturally drill a beveled hole?
Mordelay dismissed them because the alternative was scientifically unthinkable to him.
He couldn't process it.
Right. If he had accepted that intelligent, tool-wielding beings were manufacturing jewelry or tools from shark teeth during the Pliocene epoch, he would have had to completely dismantle the entire evolutionary paradigm he and his colleagues were actively constructing.
It is far easier, psychologically and professionally, to just invent a vague natural cause, even a completely unsupported one, than to take a sledgehammer to the foundation of your own life's work.
Absolutely. And if they are willing to dismiss modified animal bones, we really have to ask how they handle actual, undeniable human tools found deep within the earth.
Which brings us to part 2 of our deep dive. The stones of contention. The authors detail findings known as eoliths, or dawn stones.
These are a major point of contention in early archaeology.
In the early 20th century, a researcher named J. Reed Moore discovered stone tools in East Anglia, embedded in strata dating back to the Eocene and Pliocene epochs. We are talking about tens of millions of years ago.
Now, it is very important to define what an eolith is because skeptics frequently argue that these are just rocks that tumbled down a river and naturally chipped against one another.
But lithic experts, the people who actually study stone tools for a living, look for specific signatures of intentional manufacturing, right?
Yes. When you strike a flint core with another stone to make a tool, it produces a distinct fracture pattern called a bulb of percussion.
A bulb of percussion.
Right. It creates a specific wave-like ripple in the stone that natural tumbling simply does not replicate. River action crushes the edges. It does not produce precise radiating flakes. Moore's specimens exhibited these clear signs of intentional flaking.
And his findings were not just ignored by everyone, they were actually defended by major, highly respected figures in paleoanthropology, such as Louis Leakey.
Louis Leakey is a titan in the field.
Exactly. So if Louis Leakey defended them, why are they completely absent from modern university textbooks?
Because, according to the sources, they predated Java Man.
Java Man. The supposed 8-man missing link that the establishment had decided at that time was our true ancestor.
The knowledge filter simply could not accommodate the concept that tool-making humans were operating in England millions of years before their supposed ape-like ancestors were even walking around in Asia.
The pattern just repeats itself continuously. We see it with the discoveries of A. Ruto in Belgium. He uncovered crude paleoliths in geological context that forced him to the profoundly shocking conclusion that intelligent beings existed during the Oligocene epoch.
That is 38 million years ago.
38 million years. But the suppression of this evidence is not merely an academic debate confined to dusty library shelves. It has severe, real-world consequences for the scientists involved.
The human cost of the knowledge filter is genuinely tragic.
It is. If what the sources document is accurate, it is hard not to feel a profound sense of outrage on behalf of these researchers. Take the case of Thomas E. Lee at the Chegianda site in Canada.
This is one of the most glaring examples of active suppression.
In the 1950s, Lee discovered highly advanced stone tools embedded in glacial deposits. He didn't just guess the age, he brought in professional geologists to verify the stratigraphy.
And the geological proof demonstrated that these tools dated back anywhere from 65,000 to 125,000 years.
Which, again, violently violated the strict 12,000-year Bering Strait doctrine. Lee relied on the hard physical science of glacial striations and sediment deposition.
He did the rigorous scientific work exactly as he was supposed to.
And what was his reward for this meticulous work? According to the historical record, he was fired from his civil service position.
He lost his livelihood.
He was subjected to a targeted, relentless campaign of professional ruin. Tons of his meticulously cataloged artifacts were suddenly seized and vanished into deep storage boxes at the National Museum of Canada.
They literally hid the physical evidence.
It gets worse. The museum director who initially refused to fire Lee was himself fired. They even turned the archaeological site into a tourist resort, physically burying the evidence under infrastructure.
According to the sources, this was not a scientific debate at all. It was a targeted suppression campaign.
This is a textbook example of the knowledge filter acting aggressively. When passive ignoring fails, active professional destruction begins. And we see the exact same mechanics in the case of Virginia Steen McIntyre.
Her story is incredibly frustrating. She was an esteemed, highly capable geologist working at the Huayatlaco site in Mexico.
She and her team were tasked with dating a layer of soil containing highly advanced, sophisticated stone tools. Now, a skeptic listening might say, well, maybe her dating methods were just sloppy. Maybe she made a mistake.
But the sources explicitly detail her methodology, and it was anything but sloppy.
How did she arrive at her dates?
That is the critical point. She did not rely on guesswork or a single, potentially flawed method. She utilized multiple, independent, highly sophisticated methods, the most prominent being uranium series dating.
Explain uranium series dating for us, because this is hard science.
It is absolute hard chemistry. This is not a subjective visual inspection where someone just looks at a rock and guesses. Uranium series dating measures the radioactive decay of uranium isotopes.
Right.
Over thousands of years, uranium decays into thorium and protactinium at a known, constant mathematical rate. By measuring the ratio of these isotopes in the surrounding sediment or a bone, you get a hard, undeniable timestamp.
It is essentially a chemical clock.
Exactly. And her results consistently, reportedly showed that the strata containing the tools were 250,000 years old.
250,000 years old, found in the Americas, when the absolute rule dictated that humans did not arrive until 12,000 years ago.
And the response from the scientific community was immediate and brutal. Steen McIntyre was labeled incompetent. Her career trajectory was completely halted, and her research papers were blocked from publication.
She was professional exiled.
She was. And she later explicitly pointed out the blatant circular reasoning weaponized against her. The establishment's argument basically went like this. Homo sapiens evolved in Eurasia only 30 to 50,000 years ago. Therefore, 250,000-year-old tools made by Homo sapiens in Mexico cannot logically exist. Therefore, the uranium dating methods must be entirely wrong.
They used the abstract evolutionary theory as a weapon to invalidate the hard physical chemistry.
It is the definition of dogma.
It is deeply persuasive when you see the pattern laid out like this. We see it in the 19th century with J.D. Whitney, the chief government geologist of California.
Another highly credentialed expert whose findings were buried.
Whitney was conducting extensive surveys deep inside the auriferous gravels of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Now, for those listening, auriferous gravels are ancient gold-bearing riverbeds. Miners during the gold rush were literally blasting entire mountainsides apart with hydraulic water cannons to get to these deep layers.
They were exposing strata that had been sealed for millions of years.
Exactly. And deep inside these gravels, buried under massive, undisturbed layers of solid volcanic lava, dating back anywhere from 9 to 55 million years, Whitney found highly advanced stone tools. We are talking about mortars, pestles, and finely crafted spear points.
Whitney compiled a massive, exhaustive report on these findings for the government.
And the response from his primary critic, W.H. Holmes of the Smithsonian Institution, perfectly encapsulates the mentality of the knowledge filter.
What did Holmes say?
Holmes stated on the record that if Whitney had only understood the story of human evolution as it was currently accepted, he would have, quote, hesitated to announce his conclusions, regardless of the massive array of physical evidence he had personally documented.
That quote is just astounding. Holmes is essentially saying, it does not matter what you actually found in the dirt. If it does not match the textbook, you should keep your mouth shut.
It is anti-science. And the evidence gets even more complex when we move beyond stone tools and look at evidence of advanced culture. The sources detail the Nampa figurine.
The Idaho discovery.
Yes, this is a small, incredibly skillful clay image of a human being found during a well drilling operation in Idaho. It was brought up from a depth of 300 feet, sealed beneath a heavy, completely intact layer of ancient basalt rock.
And geologists place the age of that specific stratum at around 2 million years.
A 2-million-year-old fired clay figurine fundamentally shatters the concept of a gradual ascent from primitive ape-like behaviors. And this phenomenon is not isolated to North America, it is global.
We see it in Europe as well.
In France, at Lyon, workers discovered an incredibly precise spherical chalk ball embedded in a tertiary lignite bed. We are talking about an artifact 45 to 55 million years old.
Now, why are we so intellectually arrogant to assume that a well-crafted tool found in a 5-million-year-old rock was made by some hypothetical primitive ape ancestor?
When modern tribal humans living today make the exact same stone tools.
Exactly. We are projecting our evolutionary bias onto the stone rather than letting the stone speak for itself.
You are hitting on the core epistemological crisis of this whole deep dive. If the scientific community aggressively suppresses stone tools and artwork because they violate the evolutionary timeline, we really must ask the ultimate question.
How do they react when they are confronted with the absolute taboo?
Right. What happens when they uncover fully intact, anatomically modern human skeletons embedded within solid rock strata that are millions of years old?
That is where the filter's resistance shifts from passive rejection to absolute aggressive denial.
Let us examine the skeletons in the closet. In Chapter 7, the authors present anomalous skeletal remains that are profoundly shocking. In Italy, a highly respected professional geologist named Ragazzoni discovered the Castanedolo skeletons.
He found anatomically modern human bones resting in Pliocene beds.
Stratas that are over 3 million years old.
And the standard reflexive establishment response to such skeletal discoveries is always the same. They claim they are intrusive burials.
Explain the logic of an intrusive burial for the listener.
The logic goes that a modern human must have died relatively recently, say a few thousand years ago. Their peers dug a deep grave, placing the body down into the ancient, millions of years old rock layer below the surface soil. Therefore, the skeleton is new, even if the rock immediately around it is old.
Now, I know some of you listening right now are probably thinking, well, that makes perfect sense. A grave is the most logical explanation, and that is exactly what the scientific establishment argued at the time.
It is the easiest way to explain away the anomaly.
But Ragazzoni was not an amateur. He was a professional geologist trained to look for exactly that kind of geological disturbance. He meticulously documented that the overlying layers of clay and coral were completely, unequivocally undisturbed.
Which is the critical detail. If you dig a grave, you mix the soil layers.
Exactly. You leave a distinct vertical shaft of mixed sediment. You cannot put the rock back exactly as it was formed over millions of years. Ragazzoni proved there was absolutely no sign of a grave shaft. The bones were integrated perfectly into the original Pliocene stratum.
Yet prominent scientists of the time, figures like McAllister and Boole, dismissed Ragazzoni's physical evidence purely on theoretical grounds.
McAllister actually wrote that there, quote, must be something wrong somewhere, because if the bones were genuinely that old, it would imply an extraordinarily long pause for evolution.
He rejected the hard geological stratigraphy because it conflicted with his philosophical belief in continuous, progressive biological change.
He literally put his philosophy above the rocks in the ground, and this prejudice stretches across the globe. Look at South America. Think of the Buenos Aires skull.
Another fascinating anomaly.
This was a fully modern human skull found beneath the Tosca layer, which is an incredibly hard limestone-like formation dating back 1 to 1.5 million years. You cannot easily dig a grave through solid Tosca.
And then there is the Monte Hermoso atlas. This is a human neck bone found in Argentina in Pliocene formations, roughly 3 to 5 million years old.
And a prominent physical anthropologist, Elis Herdlicka, dismissed it. But the justification he used introduces an incredibly insidious concept that listeners really need to understand.
Morphological dating.
Yes. Let's break down morphological dating because the logic here is just staggering.
Morphological dating is the practice of dating a fossil not by the geological layer in which it was found, and not by radiometric dating, but entirely by its physical appearance, its morphology.
So how did Hrdlicka apply that?
Hrdlicka explicitly operated on the principle that if a bone looks like a modern human bone, it must automatically be assigned a recent date, regardless of the ancient rock formation it is encased within.
That is entirely circular reasoning. That is like digging up a perfectly preserved 1960s Mustang buried beneath the volcanic ash from Pompeii.
Right.
And instead of questioning the history of time travel or maybe reevaluating the historical date of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, you just declare, well, the Mustang looks modern, so Mount Vesuvius must have actually erupted in 1965.
You are forcing the timeline to fit the object rather than objectively analyzing where the object was actually found.
It is madness. The theory of evolution dictates that modern human forms cannot exist in ancient times. Therefore, any modern human form found in ancient times must be a recent intrusion, a mistake, or a hoax.
We see this vividly with the Calaveras skull.
Discovered in California by a miner, right?
Yes. The skull was found 130 feet underground beneath multiple thick layers of tertiary volcanic rock. It was a fully modern human skull situated in a formation tens of millions of years old.
And the establishment, led again by W.H. Holmes, subjected it to a massive smear campaign. They actively circulated contradictory rumors that it was a hoax planted by practical jokers.
The rumors didn't even make sense. Some reports said it was planted to fool the geologists. Others said it was planted to fool a specific miner. The stories did not even align with one another.
But the scientific community eagerly accepted the hoax rumors without any real investigation. Why? Because the rumors provided a convenient, socially acceptable excuse to simply ignore the devastating implications of the skull.
If we shift our focus now, a really stark contrast emerges. We have spent considerable time examining how the establishment actively buries the anomalous evidence that breaks their rules.
Right.
To truly understand the depth of this issue, we must look at the highly questionable, frequently manipulated evidence they eagerly accept and promote to build their classic evolutionary chart.
If the establishment is burying all these modern human skeletons, what exactly are they putting in the museum display cases to prove their timeline?
This is where the hypocrisy becomes truly staggering.
Let us look at the famous fossils they actually championed, starting with what the sources cover in Chapter 8, Java Man.
Discovered in the late 19th century by Eugene Dubois.
Yes, Dubois discovered a skull cap and a femur in Java. And for decades, Java Man was paraded in museums and textbooks as the definitive missing link, the undeniable proof of linear evolution.
And it was used as an ideological weapon to aggressively discredit the tertiary human finds we just discussed.
Yet, what is absolutely fascinating here is the modern consensus on those very bones. The famous femurs found at Trinil, which Dubois forcefully attributed to his ape-man, are now recognized by modern physical anthropologists as being virtually indistinguishable from modern Homo sapiens.
They do not belong to Homo erectus at all.
No. Dubois essentially combined a primitive, ape-like skull cap with a fully modern human leg bone that was found roughly 50 feet away in a completely different geological context, and he just declared them a single transitional species.
So they use a mismatched skeleton to confidently prove human evolution and simultaneously throw out fully intact, anatomically modern skeletons found in older rock layers.
The double standard is incredible, but Java Man pales in comparison to the subject of Chapter 9, the infamous Piltdown hoax.
One of the darkest chapters in modern science.
For 40 years, the global scientific establishment venerated a skull found in a gravel pit in Piltdown, England. Charles Dawson and Arthur Smith Woodward presented a specimen featuring a modern human cranium and an ape-like jaw.
But the Piltdown specimen was not a simple mistake. It was a deliberate, highly calculating forgery.
The mechanics of the hoax are fascinating, though. How did they pull it off?
The jaw of a recently deceased orangutan had been chemically stained with potassium dichromate to make it look ancient. Furthermore, the teeth of the orangutan had been physically filed down to mimic human wear patterns. And the jaw joint was conveniently broken off, so experts could not immediately see that it did not articulate properly with the human skull.
The technical execution of the hoax is interesting, but the crucial question is why? Why was a filed-down orangutan jaw universally accepted by the world's most brilliant scientific minds for 4 decades?
Because it showed them exactly what they were desperate to see. The British scientific establishment felt left out. Germany had Neanderthals, France had Cro-Magnon. England needed its own missing link to validate Darwin's theory on their own soil.
Nationalism mixed with scientific bias.
Exactly. The Piltdown hoax survived for 40 years because it perfectly validated their preconceived biases. It was the ultimate academic echo chamber.
It really puts it all in perspective. A single anomalous skull in California is immediately deemed a hoax with absolutely no evidence. But the Piltdown forgery is fiercely defended, taught in universities, and placed in textbooks for 40 years, purely because it confirms the established dogma.
This brings us to a brilliant observation by Vincent de Pradem from the Paris School of Anthropology, which the authors highly emphasize.
What was his take on this?
He noted that scientists are often, quote, dominated by a preconceived idea. When they observe facts, they subconsciously give those facts a twist in the direction that fits their theories.
So it isn't always malicious.
No, he argues that they genuinely, fervently believe that the law of progress must exist in nature. So when they find a highly refined tool sitting right next to a crude one in the exact same dirt, they automatically separate them.
They place the refined one in a more recent temporal category, simply because their theory demands that progress happens over time.
Exactly. They alter the data to fit the expected progression.
And we see this manipulation occur on a massive institutional scale in Chapter 10 with Beijing Man.
This involves Davidson Black and the excavations at Zucudian in China.
Black was operating with massive financial backing from the Rockefeller Foundation. Now, the authors of our sources suggest that the Rockefeller Foundation's underlying agenda was to specifically fund research that supported a purely materialistic cosmology.
Right. Their goal was to replace traditional religious narratives with scientific materialism.
And the discoveries at Zucudian were quickly heralded as massive triumphs for evolution. But when we dive deeply into the raw data from Zucudian, we uncover profound intellectual dishonesty.
The authors exposed the manipulations of scientists Wu and Lin, who published a highly influential article in Scientific American.
What did they do to the data?
They actively manipulated the skull capacity data of the Beijing Man fossils. They wanted to show a clear upward evolutionary progression in brain size over hundreds of thousands of years.
To prove we were getting smarter.
Right. To achieve this, they conveniently omitted the data of craniums that did not fit the upward trend. They created a curated, entirely artificial timeline of increasing intelligence.
They used that exact same trick we talked about earlier, morphological dating. Chinese scientists routinely took human-like fossils and pushed them into later, more recent eras. Simultaneously, they took ape-like fossils and pushed them backward into earlier, older eras.
By manually sorting the fossils based on how they looked, rather than where they were actually found in the stratigraphy, they artificially created the exact sequence of evolution that they wanted to see.
The linear progression from ape to man is not a fact of nature. It is a curated illusion, assembled by hiding the puzzle pieces that do not fit the predefined picture.
And if we accept the premise that this linear progression is a heavily filtered narrative, it forces us to confront a profound, almost unsettling question.
What does the real world, the actual fossil record, look like when you entirely remove the knowledge filter?
The totality of the evidence suggests that we are not the culmination of a solitary evolutionary branch. Rather, we have shared this planet with a diverse array of hominids for millions of years.
And perhaps, remarkably, we still do. Which brings us to Part 5. Parallel Worlds. Chapter 11 delves into a topic that usually makes academics run for the hills: cryptozoology.
It is a controversial leap for many readers.
Now, I know some of you listening might be rolling your eyes right now. You are thinking Sasquatch, really. But the authors approach this with the exact same rigorous documentary standard as the rest of the book.
They do not rely on blurry photographs or campfire stories.
No, they examine extensive historical reports. We are talking about the documented sightings of Sasquatch in North America, the wild men of China's Hubei province, where official scientific expeditions have cataloged hundreds of giant footprints and collected unidentifiable hair samples, and the Almas in Central Asia.
The reports regarding the Almas are particularly compelling because they involve highly trained observers.
Like Hans Schultenberger.
Yes, we have his 15th century account where he observed these wild, hairy humanoids in the court of a Mongol prince.
But even more striking, and incredibly difficult to dismiss, is the detailed medical examination conducted by a Russian medical officer, Dr. Topilsky.
This is a crucial piece of evidence.
During a military operation, his unit captured and killed an Almas. Dr. Topilsky physically examined the corpse. He provided a clinical, visceral, medical description.
He documented its dark, hairless face, heavy brow ridges, and distinctly non-human muscular features. Yet he specifically noted its fundamentally human-like teeth and anatomy.
The implication of this massive volume of sighting reports, footprints, and historical documentation is profoundly shocking. The scientific establishment tells us that creatures like Australopithecus or Homo erectus died out hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, eventually evolving into us.
But the unfiltered evidence suggests we didn't evolve from these creatures. We coexist with them.
They are not our ancient ancestors. They are our neighbors on the planet, pushed to the extreme remote fringes of the wilderness by modern human expansion.
And this concept of parallel coexistence is not just a cryptozoological theory. It is strongly supported by the hard fossil record when viewed without the knowledge filter, particularly in Africa, as detailed in Chapter 12.
Consider Rex skeleton. Found at Olduvai Gorge in Strata, definitively dating back 400,000 years. And it is a fully anatomically modern human skeleton.
Or the Kanapoi and Gambor humerus bones.
Right. These are arm bones found in Africa dating between 1.5 and 4.5 million years old. Modern scientists, when looking at them blindly, admit they are absolutely indistinguishable from the arm bones of modern humans living today.
But the absolute most stunning example of this parallel coexistence is the Laetoli footprints.
The Laetoli footprints, found in hardened volcanic ash in Tanzania dating back 3.6 million years. These footprints are perfectly preserved in the tuff.
And Mary Leakey, the renowned paleoanthropologist who found them, admitted they are exactly like the footprints of modern humans.
They have a well-defined arch, a pronounced heel strike, and a big toe that points straight ahead, completely parallel to the other toes.
Yet other prominent scientists, like Donald Johanson, falsely attribute these highly advanced human-like footprints to Australopithecus afarensis.
Which is the species of the famous Lucy skeleton.
Exactly. They make this claim despite the fact that biomechanical studies of Lucy's actual fossilized foot bones clearly show she had long, curved, ape-like toes perfectly adapted for grasping tree branches.
A creature with long, curved toes designed for climbing simply cannot leave a perfectly modern, flat human footprint in volcanic ash.
It is the ultimate display of cognitive dissonance. They find a perfectly modern human footprint in 3.6 million-year-old ash, but because their strict timeline dictates that humans did not exist back then, they literally force the footprint onto the foot of an ape.
The authors include an incredible quote from anthropologist Pat Shipman. After looking at the absolute mess of the African hominid fossil record, trying to figure out who evolved from whom, she confesses that there is really no clear idea of the lineage at all.
She admits that she holds on to the belief that Australopithecus is a human ancestor simply because, and I quote, "I was brought up with the notion."
I was brought up with the notion. That is a stunning moment of professional candor. It proves that what we are dealing with is fundamentally a belief system, a deeply entrenched cultural paradigm, rather than a purely objective evaluation of raw physical data.
When we synthesize the massive volume of data presented by Cremo and Thompson, the anomalous skeletons found by professional geologists, the advanced artifacts embedded in ancient strata, the accurate, unfiltered reassessment of African fossils, the pattern that emerges is definitively not sequential evolution.
No. The pattern is the continuous parallel coexistence of various ape-like and human-like beings over tens of millions of years.
Which brings us to Michael Cremo and Richard Thompson's monumental conclusion. The entire accepted model of human prehistory must be thrown out.
Not tweaked, not slightly adjusted to accommodate a new date here or there, but entirely discarded. The total comprehensive weight of the evidence, both the evidence the establishment accepts and the massive volume of evidence they have actively suppressed, demonstrates that anatomically modern humans have coexisted with other primates for tens of millions of years.
The linear evolution from ape to man is a filtered narrative. It is a fragile house of cards built by selectively discarding any piece of the puzzle that does not fit the predetermined picture.
It is a profound realization. Science is an incredibly powerful tool, but it is wielded by human beings who are subject to professional bias, institutional pressure, and the deeply human desire to maintain a comforting, orderly narrative.
Understanding the mechanics of the knowledge filter empowers us to look at the world and our own history with a far more critical and open mind.
We have spent this entire deep dive looking at how the knowledge filter has systematically buried the true ancient history of our physical bodies, hiding smartphones in Jurassic Rock, metaphorically speaking.
It really makes you question what else is out there.
Exactly. Consider this. If our most esteemed scientific institutions have unconsciously filtered out millions of years of our physical history just to protect a comfortable paradigm, what else are they filtering out right now? What fundamental truths about human consciousness, our ultimate potential, or the very nature of reality itself are currently sitting in a dusty museum drawer, ignored and unstudied, simply because they do not fit the textbook you were handed in the first grade?